Welcome to the Inspire series. So my name is Hannah Lancaster. I'm a consultant here at Bridge Innovate based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We are a business innovation consulting firm. So we work with small to large scale businesses from different capability building, leadership development, change management, strategy building, innovation capabilities, you name it, we probably do it. This is our Inspire series. This is part of our Innovation for Good section of the business where we work with different nonprofits and different volunteers to talk through different ideas and insights and challenges and experiences they have. And we use the Inspire series to share with thought leaders around the world. So today we have Sean Murray with us. So Sean is the founder and president of Real Time Performance, which is a leadership and organization development consulting firm. He is based in Pacific Northwest, and his past work includes partnerships with Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, State Farm, and Johnson & Johnson. He started his career with GE Capital at the Center for Learning and Organizational Excellence. And what he's here to talk about with us today is his most recent book titled If Gold is Our Destiny, How a Team of Mavericks Came Together for Olympic Glory. He is also the host of his own podcast, the Good Life podcast, which I am excited to listen to later on. But I'm going to go ahead and let Sean take it from here. He has a lot to get through, and this is a really exciting story that we're going to hear more about. So I'm going to come off screen share and let him take over.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here in the Bridge Innovate Inspire webinar series. And I'm excited to talk about this team. I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from a team that wins a gold medal, that is able to achieve the level of performance that it takes to be the best in the world. And I thought it would be helpful for those in the audience to get a little sense of the book, assuming not everyone's had a chance to read it. It just came out in July. And I thought I would just give a quick overview. And the idea was that we'd have a chance to provide a brief overview of the story of the team and what makes it so special without giving away too much. So on the evening of August 11th, 1984, the last day of the Los Angeles Olympics, the U.S. men took on Brazil for the gold medal. This was a significant moment for USA Volleyball because the U.S. men had never before medaled at an Olympics. In fact, they had never medaled at a major international tournament ever. In the pregame meeting, the team captain, Chris Marlowe, gave a rousing speech that culminated with the phrase, "If gold is our destiny, so be it." What brought the team to this moment? To understand, we have to go back a few years earlier. In the early 1980s, a golden generation of talent emerged on the USA national team, but there was a problem. Although the team was stacked with talented individuals, they weren't playing together as a team in a way that maximized their potential. Something had to change. In order to build teamwork and cohesion, the players and coaches together enrolled in a 3-week winter outward bound course, hiking and snowshoeing through the Abajo Mountains and canyoneering in Canyonlands National Park. They carried 70-pound packs, climbed 11,000-foot peaks, and hiked over 100 miles. Many of the players did not want to go. In the wilderness, teamwork was essential for survival, and everyone had a role to play. During the day, they took turns breaking trail for each other. Every evening, one player set up the tents while another collected firewood and the third prepared dinner. Although the players resisted going on outward bound, by the end, some of the players begrudgingly began to see the value of the experience. As one player told me, it was something we all laughed and joked and teased about in the months and years that followed. The coaches and team psychologists believed it created a foundation of much needed trust. When the players and coaches returned from outward bound, they developed through trial and error an innovative new approach to volleyball that came to be known as the American system. It allowed the creativity of the players to flourish, and the team began to win. The team learned a number of lessons along the journey to becoming the best in the world. They learned everyone has a role to play, no matter how big or small. They learned how to stay calm under pressure and believe in each other, especially when teammates made mistakes or things didn't go according to plan. They learned to listen to each other's crazy ideas, and they learned to place the success of the team above themselves. On the evening of August 11th, 1984, the team took the court for the gold medal match. To beat Brazil, each player knew one thing. they had to play as a team. If volleyball truly is the ultimate team sport, and many players believed it was, then to win the ultimate prize would demand a performance like no other. And what's my connection to this story? In 1984, I was at the Los Angeles Olympics and I attended almost every match. This is a picture of me at age 13 with the team manager, Mark Miller. Yes, he really was that tall, and yes, I really was that small. You see, my father, Don Murray, was a sports psychologist who worked with the coaches and players of this team to help them improve team dynamics and help create conditions for team success. So at the Los Angeles Olympics, I had a front row seat as this team attempted to do what no American team had done before. And then as an adult, as I wrote the book, I got to explore more deeply how this team was able to achieve what it did. And the result of that effort is the book we are going to discuss today, If Gold is Our Destiny, How a Team of Mavericks Came Together for Olympic Glory. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the team and why it's so special to me and why I think it's a special story for the sport of volleyball and also for just teams and even business teams and people to learn from.
Oh my gosh. I have so many questions, Sean, more than we could fit into 20 minutes. It's such an amazing story, and your personal connection to it is also really amazing. And one of the first things I know, I'm going to jump into something, jump in the plan, because I had a question that came up was, when you attend something and see something historical like that at such a young age, it must have been really interesting to kind of dig into the reality of the things that you weren't really aware of when you were 13. And that you now get to like dig into, and you're like, wow, that's what was happening. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's a certain amount of, it almost seems like a myth, when you go through something at that age and these players were so much bigger and on a bigger stage and were doing these amazing things and won a gold medal, and they were sort of larger than life. And then when you read when you read the reports and you do the research and you realize they're just humans. They all had their flaws, that the team really wasn't as together as it might have looked. It took a lot of work for them to become a team. They had a lot of differences. They had internal strife, but when you go through something at that age and you see the spectacle of that Olympics, which was really just amazing. Little aside, the Olympics are coming back to Los Angeles in 2028, and I think it's going to be a special Olympics for the United States to host it again, and for this team, because 9 of the 12 players were from Los Angeles. But yeah, experiencing something at that age and then going back as an adult, it was pretty interesting to see things through a different lens, really.
Yeah, that's very neat. Well, so one of my biggest questions too is what drew you to wanting to do this book? Because I know that since it was your personal experience, you have that, but what was the sort of catalyst to really wanting to do this now?
Well, about 5 years ago, my wife gave me a copy of the book, Boys in the Boat. And I don't know if those in the audience have read it, but it's a story about an Olympic team that won a gold medal in 1936 at the Berlin Olympics. And it was a crew team, and they were from the University of Washington. They happened to overcome a number of odds and remarkably were able to represent the United States at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, which is also known as kind of the Nazi Olympics. And they beat the German boat, and it was just an incredible story. And I was really inspired by the story. And I thought, I'd love to use a story to teach leadership and team building and culture, because people can relate to stories. They often relate to sports stories. And I thought, what story could I tell if I wanted to write a book or an article about a team? And then it occurred to me there was this team that I, of course, knew from when I was a kid. And through my father, I had a connection with the team. I knew the coach. His name was Doug Beal. And I called Doug up. He's still, he just recently had retired from USA, being the executive director of USA Volleyball. And I said, Doug, I'd like to write a story about that team. And he was all for it. That team has a very, very special place in volleyball history. And even today, globally, most national teams look to that team. They know about that team. There were some major players that maybe, Karch Karai, who was a multi-gold medal winning player, and then also coached the women to their first gold last summer. I think it was last summer in Tokyo. And Steve Timmons, Dusty Dvorak. But anyway, this is like the dream team, or it's a big well-known team in volleyball, not as well-known in the United States. Most people think of the 1980 U.S. men's hockey team as being this iconic team,
right.
that the underdog. But this is a story that has just as much drama. And so anyway, Doug was all for it. He connected me to it. And that launched me. Of course, it took a long time to write the book and do the research, but that's how it got started.
Wow, that's very cool. So why did they decide to go through this course? Like, what was the sort of catalyst for them to jump into this? And like, what did they learn? What really came out of it for them?
Yeah, the Outward Bound course really fascinated me. That was one of the few things I knew about the team when I thought about writing about them. I knew they won a gold medal, and I knew they'd been on this Outward Bound because I through stories from my father and had followed the team in the early 80s. And looking back on it now, I thought, now why did they go on an Outward Bound? And so I started to dig into that and try to understand. And really, what was going on was the team was not performing at the level it should have been performing. So in 1982, the team went to the World Championships in Argentina, came in 13th. So this is 2 years before the Olympics. They're 13th in the world, but yet they had talent that should have placed them in the top 5. And they really believed that they could medal. They'd never medaled before in an Olympics, but they thought, this is a home Olympics. Let's see if we can medal. And they set this goal, but it wasn't happening. And they were very inconsistent. When they fell behind, they very rarely came back. They would collapse in the last, they had never won before, and they didn't have that mentality, and they needed to get tougher. And the coaches thought, let's do something together. They said, we need a shared significant life experience. That's what the coaches and the psychologists thought. They're just coming into practice and then they're leaving, and they're not really developing the bonds that it takes to be a team. And their first thought was, let's go to, which is kind of funny, let's take them through Marine boot camp, because there's a major Marine base. They were based in San Diego, the team was, and there's a huge Marine camp base down there. And they called up the Marines, and the Marines said, no, we're not going to put your volleyball team through our boot camp.
Oh, they're not ready for that.
Yeah, can you imagine? Next best thing was Outward Bound. They had a connection to Outward Bound. And Outward Bound is an organization that probably most people know, that you take groups into the wilderness. What it's not is not a guiding service. And that's something I didn't fully understand when I was looking into it and doing the research. The idea behind Outward Bound is, as you go through Outward Bound, you teach the instructors. They're not guides, they're instructors. The instructors teach the participants how to survive, how to work together, these lessons. And so it was designed from an aspect of, how do we get this team to work together and really believe in each other? It wasn't just, let's go off and explore the American West together. Mm-hmm. So they designed it for that. And it really did work in that way, because to survive in the winter, it was a winter course. Most of these players were from Southern California, not used to being in the winter mountains. So it was snowy. There were snowshoes. You saw some of the pictures, 70-pound packs, over 100 miles, up to 11,000 feet. I mean, but they had to cook for each other and take care of each other. And that was part of it, really caring for each other. And they didn't want to go. That was another real challenge. And so the instructors around the campfire at night would often say, let's talk about, what happened today and what we can learn from it, because maybe there was some grumbling or complaining or internal strife or whatever, and they wouldn't want to talk about it. They're like, it's over. We just want to get this course over with and get back to training. Because a lot of them thought, no, the way to get better at volleyball is to be on the volleyball court.
Yeah. That's
so,
right. So they had the Outward Bound instructors, and so they were the ones that were sort of encouraging that throughout. And so did the coach kind of team with them and sort of, give them the rundown, and we're like, this is sort of what you're going to expect from these guys, and, and hopefully we get more out of it?
Well, the coaches just joined the players as participants in Outward Bound, as equal participants. So the coaches, and this, to their credit, they didn't just say, hey, you guys are going to go off on this thing and, figure out how to work together. And when you come back,
which never worked.
It took a very courageous decision by the coaches to go on this trip, because there were some risks. I mean, you could get hurt out there, right? The players could create enough resentment that maybe they wouldn't gel, because they really didn't want to go. And so there was some risk. And I think by going on the trip themselves, they they mitigated that risk to a certain extent, but they also are part of the team. And that's something that they came to understand, is that the team is not just the players. The team is the coaches and the players together. They're a unit. And how they provide feedback to each other, how they learn from each other, communicate, trust each other, all of that's really important. And so they just went on the course, and they were just right there with them, learning from the instructors. And the instructors would teach them how to use a compass and a map, and sometimes they'd get lost and sometimes they wouldn't. But over time they figured it out.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I just think about like the weekend backpacking trips I go on, and like the learnings from that, but I can't imagine 3 weeks with a team like that would be really fascinating. So I know a few of the players got let go from the team. I don't know if it was before or after, but what was the impact of that, and why did they decide to do that?
Yeah, that was another significant event or, factor that I noticed in how this team came together. There were a couple players that were very, very talented. And what some of the coaches said, the best player on the team, who at that time, who didn't want to go on Outward Bound and also wanted to play professionally in Europe during half the year, wanted to also play on the beach. And the coaches demanded a certain level of commitment to the team that precluded the players from going and playing in Europe professionally. There was also a lot of issues around professional versus amateur at that time for the Olympics. But so they said, look, you either committed to the team, or you can go play professionally, you can go play on the beach, but you won't be playing on this team for the Olympics. And, this is something that it's easy to say to a player that maybe it was going to be a second stringer on the bench. But if it's the best player in America, you get a lot of heat. And the coaches, from the volleyball press, from even parents of other players, there was a feeling that you couldn't win without this player. And, what happened was the team actually got better. And we see this in business, right? You see someone on a team that is more about themselves, maybe ego-driven, doesn't live the values of the organization. And yet, they might be talented in many ways, but unless you can really buy into the culture and the values, then the team is going to be better off with a group of committed individuals that put the success of the team above the individual. And so that was another example of just a courageous decision, risk-taking. And I think you have to do that to be the best in the world. You're going to have to do some things a little bit different. And that was another one.
Right. Yeah, I really love that. Because I mean, that it is something you see, day to day. Just because somebody is good at something doesn't mean that they're the best teammate, and the best addition to something. Yeah, it's really amazing. So you were talking about the American system and sort of that innovative new approach to volleyball. And so I guess it's still being used today. And then can you talk about where that came from and how that came about and what was different about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the exciting part of the story that relates to what you guys do at Bridge and just in this innovation series webinar, because they came back from Outward Bound and there was trust. And I think trust is just that foundation. If you have a team and you want to be innovative and creative, there's got to be a level of trust. And so the trust was there. Then it was, okay, what are we going to do to, how are we going to win? How are we going to utilize the unique strengths of our team? And what they did, a lot of teams did at that time, was try to copy the best teams in the world. So they looked at the Soviet Union, which was the best team in the world at the time. And they thought, well, maybe we should be copying their system. And they had a certain type of player, bigger body, larger, kind of broader shoulders. They were great at blocking, and they were very tall. The American team wasn't that tall compared to the Soviets. They were very more agile, quick, creative players. They grew up playing on the beach, and they would try different things. And so they realized, okay, we're not going to be able to do the Soviet way. And so then they looked at the Japanese, because the Japanese had also won a gold medal. And they thought, okay, but in the Japanese system, everyone does everything exactly the same way, because they bring up these young players from the scratch, from an early age, and they buy into this system. And the coaches had made these like great, beautiful videos and books about how to win a gold medal using the Japanese system. And the American coaches went to the Japanese coaches and they thought, well, why are you giving away all your secrets? Because we're going to try to, that doesn't make sense. And they said, well, it does make sense, because only the Japanese can play like the Japanese. And
Mm.
it was a light bulb moment for the coaches. Because, the coach, Matsudera, said, it's like a Xerox copy. You could take a copy of our Japanese system, but it's going to be degraded. And then if you copy that copy, it's going to be further degraded. It will never be as good as the original. So they were perfectly fine telling the world about how to win in the Japanese system. And so the coaches realized we've got to figure out how to win that utilizes our strengths. And I mentioned these players came up on the beach, very creative. And so they created a system that, we don't have a lot of time to get into the details, but I would say specialization is the key, that players started specializing in unique aspects of the game as opposed to trying to have 6 players out there that could do everything, because there's a whole rotation thing in volleyball. And they also put 2 players back to receive the serve. Most teams had 3 or 4, and they put 2, and it was the same 2 players, and that had a big impact. And they called a lot of audibles. Before, there's a setter who would sort of call a play. And what the Americans realized was the setter would call a play, but then they allowed all the hitters to call their unique approaches to the net. So the setter might call alpha, and then a player might say red or pipe, and that would mean that they're going to go this way or that way. And so what the other team saw was just like players going everywhere, and they didn't know where to block. And it was really incredible. And wow. Teams still use it today. So it's just a huge win for that team that they developed, and it took trust, and it was all about innovation and creativity.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that's just so based in relationships, and yeah, being willing to communicate and talk through things, and what you said, listening to people's different ideas. And yeah, it's just a really amazing story. So I know people typically, when they're listening to the webinar series, love to hear sort of what they can take away and use like in their daily lives. So, yeah. Most teams can't go out on a 3-week outward bound trip, but I for one would love to. So I'm gonna make sure to mention that to Jenny at some point.
There you go. Maybe that'll be a
maybe we can go sailing for 3 weeks. I'd be down for that. What would you recommend for teams in terms of like that team building and building that trust, like things people can do like on a daily basis, or even just like once a year, twice a year, like to kind of still get that same impact?
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do short of going on that kind of a 3-week winter experience. And it starts with even just understanding people's backgrounds and history, and having people share stories of themselves, maybe a time that's something that's sort of vulnerable, something that's happened, something that they've overcome, something that other people might not know about them, something that maybe was embarrassing, that they're willing to share, but yet they can still laugh at. I mean, these are kinds of things that you end up relating to people in a really fun way. And, that's an easy way, but just continuing to do activities outside of work in some way. I mean, the traditional happy hour, that's why that's been around for as long as it has in the United States. But it's like, there's, building those relationships. I think it's going to be harder in remote times, if people aren't at the water cooler and you don't get to see your coworkers in that way. But I guess I would build the case for the importance of that, as a leader. If you're out there and you're leading teams or you're leading an organization, building a culture where people can relate to each other at a deeper level, where they're able to build a relationship and have the trust. That's how you get to the innovation. Right. Just for an example, like with this team, no one came in and said, this is the new American system. I've designed it. Here it is. It was a trial and error. And the only way that works is if they trust each other. So a player says something, why don't we try this? The coaches have to trust them. Okay, I'll trust. And then and then maybe a coach says, let's try this. And then the players have to trust the coaches. And it's that give and take and trust that allows teams to sort of innovate and creatively iterate towards something new.
Yeah, well, I really love that. I mean, there's, again, so many things I could ask. I think it's such a fascinating story. And I love hearing about just like also how nature can really impact the way that people move through the world. I think is really amazing too. But I want to open it up for questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We have a few more minutes. Sean can answer some of those. And so there's a chat box at the bottom, and then there's also a Q&A box. So I think I have one here. It says, love the idea of team bonding over outdoor challenges and outside of work. Any suggestions for dealing with team members who just really aren't into getting out there with others?
Yeah, like getting into the outdoors. Yeah, sometimes you gotta find activities that are going to work for everyone. And to my earlier point, sometimes it doesn't have to be that you're struggling in the outdoors. It can be how you end up relating to people, right? And, understanding people at a level that gets outside of work. But just taking a walk together around a park, it doesn't have to be out in the national park or anything. Just getting out of the office and walking and talking and seeing some different scenery can be a really great experience. If you're going to share a coffee with someone, maybe walk down to the coffee shop with them or something. That even something as simple as that, it would be amazing how that sort of changes the dynamics.
Yeah, we recently had a client do an outdoor volunteer day with the team. So there was about 40 of them, and they went and did like a trail building sort of afternoon for a couple hours. I think it was like 2 or 3 hours. And it just sounded so amazing, just because even something like that, like where this team typically are on their computers all day, they were like a finance department, so they're like processing and very, just very rigid in the way that they move through their work. And to get out and do something like that, even as simple as like a volunteer where it's kind of, structured in a different way, I thought was really cool too.
That's great. And I know Habitat for Humanity, organizes those kinds of volunteer activities for corporations and nonprofits. And so that's another way. And I recently was part of a leadership development program that's built on the Lewis and Clark, like lessons from Lewis and Clark.
Oh, neat.
Held along the Columbia River. Mm-hmm. And part of that, we teach about the Lewis and Clark leadership lessons in the classroom, but then we get out and we walk along the river together to different places and just getting out in Mother Nature, seeing what they experienced and walking together as a group and talking and learning that way. Yeah, it really totally changes the dynamic. It's really interesting. You can see, if you did this for 3 weeks with a group of people, how you'd get to know them, almost like brothers, so
yeah,
it's very really cool. Worked out for them. Yeah.
We have another question here. Are there data sources that make the business case for investing in team development? Do you know of any in particular?
Data sources? Yeah. Well, I'm not sure where I would turn for, to build, like, to say, here's the database for the ROI on this stuff. But if you look at the best teams, either in sports or in business, you're going to find that they share certain characteristics. And a great book for that, actually, this is a little bit on the sports side, but there's a book called The Captain's Class, and the author's name is Sam Walker. He's a former Wall Street Journal writer, sports writer, but he went out and he researched dynasties in sports. So men's and women's sports, not just the US focused, but across the world. So it included things like rugby and cricket and things like that. And they found the teams that were able to win multiple dynasties, like the 0.0001% of all teams that were so much better than the other teams. And he looked at common characteristics. He found 17 of them that were outliers. Like one of them's the Patriots with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. And he found that the captain, there's usually an internal leader out there on the team. It's not the coach, it's not the scheme, but there's usually someone who is able to elevate the players and set expectations for themselves and others that makes the team play at a higher level. And it's a fascinating read. And so that's one where the research is really there. Now it's related to sports, but I think you take a team in business and you're asking them to perform, you could look at the same characteristics that Sam Walker looked at across these. So it's a very scientific study as far as looking at the best dynastic teams in sports. And then what he uncovered was so much along the lines of what I uncovered when I learned about this team. And this team was not one of the 17 that he identified, but he was like a tier 2. There was about 50 that were right up there, because this team didn't just win one gold medal, they went on to win another one in 88. And then I think they won silver or bronze in 92. So they pretty much dominated for about 8 years. And nobody, they they were almost unbeaten in major tournaments during that time. So anyway, I would check out Sam Walker's book for some research there.
Great. Yeah, I put it in the chat if anybody wants to read that. Sounds
Great.
interesting. So we are coming to a close, but where can people find you? I'm sure like on LinkedIn and different places, but where can they find your book and how can they stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so the book is If Gold is Our Destiny. And in fact, I'll just put that back up there. So the book is If Gold is Our Destiny. You can find it at Amazon or just about anywhere where books are sold. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a website that's realtimeperformance.com. That's my company, and I write regularly there articles. And also there's a link to my podcast there called The Good Life. And I'm on Twitter at Sean P. Murray 111. So 111. So Sean P. Murray 111 if you want to find me on Twitter. And yeah, reach out. Sean M at realtimeperformance.com is my email. So I'd love to hear from anyone who's in the audience or listening to this and wants to learn more about this team or what I learned from studying it.
Perfect. Love it. I also put your book in the chat as well. So it sounds great. Well, we have a couple more events coming up. So make sure to tune back in next week. We have Joanna Toma coming in on October 5th. She's going to be talking about cultivating flexible skills-based talent. She's a strategy, it's going to be a strategy brief from Unum. She's an AVP of skills and talent development. And then we also have Adam Walcott coming in October 19th, talking about reinventing the entrepreneurial journey. So make sure that you visit bridgeinnovate.com under events to sign up for these. They are free webinars where you can watch them on YouTube, just like you'll be able to watch this one later on. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.